Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we are going to be covering the cards, elements, and rules for Historia TCG. That's right, I have finally put together a video about how to play Historia TCG for the Playtest 0.4.0, which in fact is out now. I will have all the resources down in the description for the video, but that's right, you too can now playtest this card game and let me know what you think. I would really appreciate it if you have the time, read the rules or watch this video, and go ahead and play the game with the cards. There will be resources down below where you can print the cards out. It has all the different cards and even ways to join the Discord server and watch and learn and talk to people who have been playtesting. And yeah, from there, we shall now begin a little rules overview. So first, let's see what I put here. What do you need to play Historia TCG? Historia TCG is designed to be played with 2 or more players. So you can play with 2 to 4. You definitely need yourself and a friend. If you have more than one friend, that's great. You can all play together. That's awesome. As well, you will need a civilization card, which we had a video on, which will be linked up above, as well as a deck, and your deck must consist of 60 cards with no more than 4 of any card, unless the card is the citizen card. Yes, we have these cards called citizen cards. I believe I talk more about them in the rules. If I don't, there will be another video about them, maybe next week or so. Also, I recommend having some dice for rolling. Some cards have dice rolls on them, some cards have coin flips on them. Have tokens that you can put on your cards. Some cards will have their stats increased. Place the tokens on those stats to then increase them. It's a good idea to do that, to keep track of your stats. So have the appropriate resources. What you need is the deck, the friend, the civilization card, and if you want to have more, have the dice, have the coins, have some tokens. It'll make your life so much easier. As well, I recommend having 20-sided dice, have 3 sets of them, 3 20-sided dice, each to keep track of your point total for your knowledge points, your power points, and your culture points. We're going to be talking about those in a little bit, but those are the points that you need to win and you need to pay to play higher cards. So by having a dice for each one, it's great for keeping track. If you have roll-up d20s, like the ones where 1 is connected to the 2 right beside the 3 is right beside the 2, and the 4 is right beside that, so you could technically just roll the dice to go from 1 to 20. If you have that, use those. It will make your life so much easier. Okay, now let's talk about what makes up a card. So, for the Historia trading card game, there are 2 card formats. They look pretty much identical. The first one is for characters and buildings. So, characters, this is a character card. The only difference between the character card and the building cards are the stats, which buildings don't have. But for a character card, the character card has a name, it has a card type symbol. The card type we'll be covering in a little bit. There's a picture on it. There's a banner. The banner is only there for historic characters and wonder cards. Historic characters are like Julius Caesar. Wonders are like the Taj Mahal. Right? If you have a non-historic character or a non-historic wonder, which would be a non-historic building, right? If you don't have a wonder, it would just be a basic building. Then they don't have this little banner on the side. So that's a great identifier between the 2 of them. You have the era. For the TCG, I have split up time into 5 eras. They're relatively Western-centric, but it was one that I thought kind of approximately worked for a reasonable portion of the world. These are not hard, fast deadline. Like, when we pass the following year, you've exited the classical era and entered the medieval one. These are just sort of mushy boxes that we slide cards into. All characters fall into an era. And then character cards have a subtype. Buildings don't have subtypes. That's okay. Buildings do have eras, though. They may not in the current playtest, but they will. I don't remember if we put them in the playtest. If they don't have them in the playtest, oopsie, they're coming in playtest 0.4.1. You will have an effect in the effect box. There is flavor text down below. I believe every card's flavor text currently just says flavor text because it's a lot of work to come up with flavor text for 240 cards. You'll then see the stats on the side if this is a character card. So if you have a historic character, Julius Caesar. If you have a basic character, it would be like pottery maker, potter, I guess, or sculptor. They have stats, and the stats correspond to the 3 points that are relevant. So these are knowledge, culture, power. So you as a player have a knowledge stat, a culture stat, and have knowledge points, culture points, and power points. But characters have a knowledge stat, a culture stat, and a power stat. Stats are KS, CS, PS for short, right? Knowledge stat, culture stat, power stat. Points are knowledge points, KP, CP, PP for PowerPoint. That is the way that we denote them on a lot of the cards. You may notice that. This is just the shorthand. If you see a P, like we have in the cost banner, a generic P actually stands for any type of point. So if you're paying a cost, let's say it has KP 3, CP1, PP0, P1. So right, then you'd pay the KP cost, the CP cost with KP, with knowledge points and culture points, and then that extra P, maybe you have a PowerPoint sitting around. You're like, well, I don't need this PowerPoint, so you use that to pay for that P cost. Finally, in the bottom corner, you will have a number. So all the cards have a different number. Why do I have 2 out of 238? There are currently 240 cards. I may have made this slide a bit early, but I believe there are 240 cards. So if you find a card that you decide that you want to use and you print it, and it is number 234, or sorry, 240, it isn't a secret rare card. These are just, I messed up on the numbers for the current versions. Or I messed up the example. We'll see. And anyways, let's take a look at the non-character, non-building cards. These look like this. So they have a card name, they have another card symbol. The card symbol notes the type of card it is. Again, very similar to the type symbol for the characters, just these are more generic. So all event cards have the same event symbol, unlike characters. Thinker characters will have a different symbol from creator characters. You'll learn more about that in the next section. Again, with a picture again, some of these cards have eras, artifacts only. Right? The other cards, besides characters and buildings, are events and artifacts. Yeah, events and artifacts. And events have eras assigned to them. Sorry, artifacts have events assigned to them. Events do not. Subtype, again, artifacts have a subtype. Events don't usually have subtypes. This is also what a nation card looks like, by the way, approximately. They have a nation symbol. They don't have an era. They don't have... Their subtype might say nation on them. And then we have an effect box. You have the flavor text. And you have the card number. And so this is approximately what you should expect to see for a non-character, non-building card. With those expectations set, let's now move into what the card type symbols mean. So, on the left side, you can see the generic ones, the ones that are the same for all buildings. So, civilization cards have a civilization flag, event cards have the exclamation mark, artifacts have the pot, buildings have the building sign. How do we differentiate wonders from buildings? Their subtype will mention that they're a wonder, as well as the building cards with the cost banners are... Actually, not all wonders have cost banners. I believe there are some basic buildings that have costs, like town. Anyways, it will say wonder on the subtype, I believe. If there is an issue with this in the playtest, I am going to be checking it after recording this video, and it will be fixed for version 0.4.1. With this in mind, let's look at the character cards. Now, character cards are broken into these 6 super types. Currently, we're just calling them types. These are thinkers, creators, militarist, merchant, spiritualist, leader. There is technically another type, which is the blank type, which is what citizen cards fall, because they're just general and generic. But pretty much 99.9% of all characters fall in this category. Thinkers are people like scientists, inventors, that kind of feel. People who have big ideas, political scientists, etc. Creators are far more influential people on society that bring around cultural shifts. So artists, actors, even athletes fall under the creator category sometimes. Militarists are, well, as they sound, they are warriors, usually fighters, combatants, etc. Merchants are traders as well as explorers. So, right, if we had an explorer like Christopher Columbus is the first one that always comes to mind, right? Or Zhang Yi. Those characters are merchants because most explorers actually did some kind of merchant style trading along their explorations. Not always, but they fall under the similar umbrella for this game. So explorers, cartographers, messengers, even merchants, traders, all fall under the merchant character class, the merchant type. Spiritualists are religious figures. Some spiritualists could fall under thinkers, but the spiritualist category is usually priests, incredibly religiously devout people who are known for their religious devotion or their religious acts. And then finally, leader characters. Leader characters are like kings, major activists, that sort of thing. These are people who are known for leading rather than any other category. And leaders, of course, right, characters in one category could possibly fall into other ones. For now, we are just using one category for each character. Definitely, maybe in future sets, after the game has been developed, there will be the idea of having dual type cards. Currently, all cards have one of these types that is a character, except for citizens. Citizens have none. So, what are the stats? Well, right, characters have stats. 3 stats, as we said: knowledge, culture, power. Knowledge stat is kind of based off the character intelligence, which isn't a great way to put it, right? It's a way to show sort of their intellectual strength based on history. And of course, these are all going to be balanced based on the game, so they're not going to be perfect one-for-ones, right? Your favorite smart person might actually not have as high of a stat because their effect is better. We don't want to keep things balanced. But for example, Albert Einstein is going to have a higher intelligence stat than your Roman legionary, for example, right? Culture stat based off the person's cultural impact. Very much the creator type. You may notice that the thinker, creator, militarist really just sort of match the knowledge, culture, power categories, and that's sort of on purpose. They're supposed to emulate each of those different stats the most, and then the next 3 are more specialized, more covered over a variety of these categories, but are more heavy on different effect types, kind of. Anyways, culture is based on, cultural impact. So again, right, an athlete and a painter will have higher stuff than a librarian, usually, right? And the power stat is based off the character's strengths, military power, right? So, a warrior will have a high power stat, but so will an athlete. An athlete will have a high power stat. Or one of my greatest examples is Plato, a thinker, was also a wrestler. And so Plato will have a high knowledge stat and a high power stat, but probably a lower culture for balancing purposes, right? Stats are used for challenges. So during the game, how you interact with your opponent usually is through a challenge. We're going to be getting into challenges later, but the idea is you can challenge with one of the stats. So I would, if you're my opponent, I would say, hey, you, I'm going to do a knowledge challenge against you. And it's like, I'm going to use a knowledge challenge. And so then during the challenge, we only use the knowledge stat for my characters and your characters. That's what's compared during the challenge. Okay? So points, right? I mentioned that there are knowledge points, culture points, power points, KP, CP, PP. So some cards will cost points to make, and others will make points. Your historic characters, your wonders, some event cards, some effects will cost you points. But there are also cards that are going to give you points. What we currently have is for the basic characters, almost every basic character can produce points for you. Not all of them, but the majority of them have. So we have a tap style feature in the game. I believe I'm going to cover it more later. But the idea is you can essentially tap a character and you get points, but then you can't use them in a challenge this turn. You can't use their effect. They are expended. They're engaged, pretty much. You need to engage the character. You unengage the character at the end of the turn. Anyways, the point is the number of points represent sort of the influence that you have in your field. You are playing your nation. So if I play the British Empire, if the British Empire has a lot of culture points, then we have a high cultural influence, but a low military one because we have no military points. And the idea is you win the game if you have 20 points in one field. So if we have 20 knowledge points by the end of a turn, you win. Cool? It's not the only way to win the game, but it is the primary way. And I believe I go into win conditions a bit later, so hopefully we'll come to that. Subtypes of characters. So right, we mentioned typing of the creator type, thinker type, etc. For characters, there are subtypes. And they will always have 2 to 3 subtypes. Technically, you can have one subtype as well. You have 1 to 3. This is not the correct thing to say. You can have 1 to 3 subtypes. Okay? One subtype. You do have 2 to 3. I forgot because we now have the explicit typing of basic as a subtype. Originally, we didn't have the historic and basic subtypings. We only had the historic subtypings. But the idea is, right, one of these is always historic or basic. So if we have, and the other 1 or 2 are of a grouping that you can see here, arrow to represent they fly planes or plane related, space related even, right? Artists for artists, actors, sculptors, etc., musicians. Athlete for athletic individuals, authority for authoritative individuals, people in government, people in control, people in command, cavalry for, you ride a horse, common for generic. So for example, a blacksmith has a common as a subtype. Economic for, money driven. So like an investor, a bank will have an economic subtype. Mechanical is for, mechanical devices, cannons, tanks, etc. Medical for, medical related people. Doctors are going to have the medical typing. Melee is for people who fight mainly hand to hand. Naval is for ships. Boats. Ranged is for an archer would have the ranged subtype. For example, they do stuff at a distance, mainly combat related. Scholars are going to be people who do research. The difference between scholars and STEM here is scholars are far more social science-y related, and STEM are far more hard science and tech related. So for example, a historian is going to get the scholar typing, but a physicist is going to get the STEM typing. Scholars write. That's kind of the differentiation that we're using here. As well, we have the storyteller type. Storytellers are designed to be like, playwrights, writers, etc. Travelers are also the final subtype designated for people who travel. So a character will have 2 to 3 subtypes. So for example, a 2 subtype one could be a basic athlete for a surfer card. The surfer is a basic athlete. It's not a famous person. They're just an athlete surfer. A 3 subtype card could be a historic economic traveler, which could be Marco Polo, right? Marco Polo travels a lot. He was a merchant trader, and he is a person from history, so historic economic traveler. That's the premise behind it. Subtypes for buildings. Buildings have subtypes too. Like we mentioned, these subtypes are either basic or wonders. Basic buildings, generic. Wonders, you can only have one of any wonder built unless there's a special reason behind it. Same with historic, by the way. Basic characters, you can have as many as you want in play. Legendary characters, you can only ever have one in play of its name. So, for example, let's say you have 2 Albert Einsteins in your hand. Well, you can only ever have one of them in your court, which is the region of play, and then when it's destroyed, when Albert Einstein gets defeated, you can recruit the next one, so you can play the next one. But you can't have Albert Einstein in play and then play another Albert Einstein unless the name of the 2 Albert Einsteins, it can be, Albert Einstein versus Albert Einstein, genius of science, right? Those would be 2 distinct cards. Then you could have them at the same time. Think of it like the legendary rule for Magic, if you ever heard of that, where, you can't have 2 of the same named card that are both legendary. Same premise. Artifacts have subtypes too. Yeah, that's right. So they can have 1 or 2 subtypes. There are normal artifacts that only have 1. Legendary artifacts have 2. If you're a legendary artifact, you immediately have the subtype legendary. But all artifacts have one of the following subtypes of literature, object, or weapon. Okay, so for example, a literature artifact could be a famous book from history. So it would be, let's say, Darwin's, Journey to the West. Journey to the West. There we go. Journey to the West. Literary artifact. Cool. Legendary object could be an object, a piece of writing that is famous from history. So it could be Queen Elizabeth's crown. Right? That's an object. That's not a piece of literature. It's not a weapon. It's an object, and it's legendary. Right? For example, another legendary weapon could be, Sword of not Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh is legendary. Sword of Genghis Khan, right? For example. They're very specific. There's only ever going to be one of them, right? Legendary artifacts aren't generic. So even though normal artifacts that aren't legendary may be things from history like, Journey to the West, a written book. It isn't the original Journey to the West. There are many Journey to the West that have been written, so you can have multiple of them. The neat thing about legendary artifacts is you're only allowed to have one of any of them in your deck. Now you're allowed to have, you can have 5 legendary artifacts, but they all need to be distinct. You can't have 2 Rosetta Stones, for example, in your deck. You can only ever have 1. Eras. As I mentioned, we've broken the game into eras. That's right. So cards are broken into eras approximately on the time period they're from. These are not hard and fast. These are just really approximate points. So we kind of say classical era is about 500, common era, and anything before that. Medieval, anything from about that point to 1450. End of the Renaissance, fall of Constantinople, rise of the Ottoman Empire. That kind of time period. Exploration is, anything from about where that ended, right? So, end of the Renaissance, Columbus arrives in North America. Everybody starts exploring the world around this kind of time point. And it's more like we're referring to, same deal as Zhang He, I believe, technically falls before this time period. But we would refer to him as being an exploration card because his whole premise, he's so close, and it's when China started their period of major exploration. he gets to be an exploration card, right? So these are not very, set in stone eras per se. An industrial is sort of like after the Industrial Revolution or during the Industrial Revolution, all up to the 1900s. The only hard and fast period is the modern era, which is 1900 onwards. And again, it is still like a fuzzy line around there because let's say we have someone born in 1950, but they live till, they're born in 1850, they live till 1950. Where do we place them in that time slot? Do we place them in the modern cards or do we place them as industrial? That sort of thing. Don't expect to see too many modern cards. We're mainly focusing on the first 4 eras for now because modern gets tricky. If I want to use someone who died, who isn't alive from 70 years ago, some people still have copyrights on themselves. It just gets far more messy, so we're going to be focusing a lot more on those first 4. Do still expect some modern cards. It's not like they're going anywhere. They do still exist and they will still show up. So, now that we have the basis of the rules, I'm surprised I haven't done the how to win section yet. But it's coming, and if we don't do it, I'm going to talk about it at the end. But now we need to know the areas of play. Where do you play your card? So, we have some terms for these regions of play. The first one is the map. The map is pretty much every single region of play. Everything in the game. Your deck's technically on the map. Your discard pile is on the map. Your court, which is the area of play that you control, where you have your advisor zone, which is the area that you can play your characters, your building zone, which is where you can play your building cards, the travel zone, we'll talk about the travel zone in a little bit, right? Your civilization card, which is the card with your choice of nation, right? These are all on the map. Your court is your part of the map. And there's technically an area between the players, which is called which doesn't really have a name, but it's where we conduct challenges, because challenges occur between the players. And you'll get that a bit more when we talk about challenges. The only area outside of the map is the exile zone. Otherwise, if it's in the game, it's on the map, pretty much. All of the map really, if we're referring to cards on the map, gain plus 5 points. Well, your discard pile is not active on the map. They don't really count. Your deck doesn't really count. I just realized there's a bunch of loopholes here. But the idea is the map is all regions of play. Deck, discard pile, civilization cards are still technically in play. They're still in the region of play. They're still on the map. But they can't be interacted with. Cool? Okay. Here's an example of a player's part of the map. So this is not just the court. This is sort of your whole section of play. And we've designated regions for now. You don't need to exactly follow these hard and fast currently. Although we may set this up as the official, play mat, what it should look like. But you can see here we have our civilization card, our discard pile on the other side in front of our deck, and then you can have a total of 7 character cards out in play in your advisor zone of your court. And the building zone of your court can have a total of 7 building cards. And then we have the travel zone, travel cards. So certain cards have an effect. This effect is called traveling. Pretty much the card goes into the travel zone, and you can have as many cards as you want in the travel zone at once. But pretty much they're out of play. You cannot use them for challenges. They exist on the map, but you don't really have any control over them, and then you can bring them back. Certain ones only go out of play for a certain period of time. They come back, they do an effect. You can also force an opponent's card to travel for a certain period of time. That's kind of how travel works. So, here it is. This should have been earlier. But how do you win at this game? Man, we've been talking about this game for forever. But how do you win? Well, you win Historia TCG by doing one of these 4 things. Have 20 knowledge points, right? Have 20 culture points by the end of the turn, or have 20 power points by the end of the turn. If you meet one of these, you win. Congratulations. If you have the most, however, what happens next? Well, when someone decks out, pretty much they run out of cards, there's no more cards in their deck, and the turn has ended. And at the end of the turn, there's no more cards in the deck. They don't automatically lose, which is usually common, right? Usually decking out is a loss. However, in Historia, they've run out of cards in their deck. The game is now over. And the winner of the game is the person with the most total points, with the most influence overall. So it's important to be aware that an opponent could technically mill their way to victory. And so sometimes it's important to force your opponent to put their discard pile back into their deck. So we've mentioned ending turns during a turn, but you may have noticed I didn't say your turn. This is because Historia has a cool little tool. Everybody plays at the same time. That's right, the concept behind Historia is that we have everybody completing the same turn at the same time. I've come up with a few neat names for it, but I don't really have one that I've stuck to. But pretty much you have simultaneous turn completion. So what happens is instead of everybody playing everything at once, how we do this is we break it into phases. And you take turns doing the phases, right? So if you think of a game like, I think Pokemon is probably the one that I'll remember the phases for best, right? You have a draw phase, you have a main phase, you have your attack phase, you have a second main phase, and then then your turn ends. How this works is you do your draw phase, the opponent does the draw phase, you do your main phase, your opponent does the main phase, etc., etc. Pretty much the player who starts does their phase first, and then each player clockwise from them completes their phase. However, once the turn ends, that is when everybody has completed their end phase. The player who was leading goes ahead and passes the turn to the person left of them. So let's say you're playing three people. You have A, B, and C. A starts the turn. For turn one, A is leading. They do everything first. And now the next turn has come. B does everything first. That means that A goes last, etc., etc. So the turn leader shifts around the table. We're going to go into a bit more order about what a turn entails. And the turn pretty much you have a few things that you can do. During your turn, you may recruit once. That means that you may play a character card one time. You may build once. That means playing a building card during it. You may play an event. Now, recruiting and constructing, there are certain phases when this is allowed and when it isn't allowed. But event cards you can play whenever you want. And you can play an event card. And you may do more than these effects if cards allow you. So, citizens are one of the main ways to let yourself recruit more, construct more. This is called extra recruit, extra construct. You may also use citizens to play extra event cards. However, we don't have a name for that yet. I just realized there probably should be a name for special events. Anyway, the idea is you can play another event card. Very, very cool. So, phases of play. Phases of play are broken into the following 5 sections. The draw phase, setup phase, challenge phase, recovery phase, end phase. Draw phase. Very, very simple. Turn begins on the first draw phase. Pretty much the split second before the first draw phase begins, the turn starts. So if you have a turn starting effect, it starts here, then the draw phase begins. You draw one card. That's it. That's nothing fancy. You draw one card. Then we get to the setup phase. After everybody's completed that, we get to the setup phase, and this is when you can recruit. This is when you can build. This should say construct, not build. But constructing is pretty much building. The idea is you can play a building card. You can equip any amount of artifacts cards. This can happen. This is another thing that you could do during your turn. But equipping artifact cards, you can equip as many as you want. you can send cards to travel. So if a card has an effect, it's like you make this card travel for a turn. This is when you activate the effect. And it goes to your travel card. And then you can engage a card in your court. So engaging is tapping the card pretty much, right? So we can engage a card to get 1 point, engage 2 cards. They may give us each 1 point, 1 culture point, 1 knowledge point each. That sort of thing. You can engage a card to boost another card. But then you can't use those cards in challenges, which is what we're about to get to. Challenge phase. You may choose to do one of the following during the challenge phase. You can choose to challenge an opponent or not challenge an opponent. If you do not challenge, you get 1 point, so 1p in 2 different stats. So this would be, you can get a knowledge point and a culture point, or a culture point and a power point, or a power point and a knowledge point. Any of those combinations are allowed. And then you get to draw a card. So it's not a bad deal if you don't challenge. You get something out of it. And we're going to talk about challenging in a bit, but first we got to do the recovery phase. Recovery phase, you can recruit if you haven't recruited, you can build if you haven't built, or you can do, your special recruits, special builds. Equip again during this time. You can return cards from traveling. So if a card said, I'll travel for a turn, the turn has gone around, now you can return this card. So you've done a whole turn, a turn has elapsed, and then you can bring back the card. And then this is when you can engage cards again in your court. So again, pretty much our equivalent of tapping those cards. End phase. This is when, this is unbusy. So the engage effect used to be called busying. But this is pretty much you unengage the cards, you disengage. We haven't picked the exact word for it yet, but the idea is you untap your cards. And once everybody has finished their end phase, the turn ends. And the next turn starts with the person to the left of the last player. Or pretty much starts on the last player. Yeah, anyways. So now we gotta get to challenging. How do we challenge? Challenges are an important part of the game. So first, you challenge a player by declaring it. So if we have me and you are playing a game, I say, hey you, I challenge you. I'm going to enact a knowledge challenge against you. Okay, so now I'm the challenger, and I select any number of characters in my advisor zone that I have that aren't engaged, and place those face down in the challenge zone. Middle of the map, right? Place them face down. I can pick them up, I can shuffle them around, and I can place them face down. Then, you, the defender, you can put any characters that you want from across, pretty much across from these face down cards to counter them. So you have a bunch of characters, and you can go, well, I don't want to lose ABC, but I have DEF, and I remember his cards were strong. My cards are stronger than one of his cards. So there's a chance that I can place this guy against it if I'm willing to risk it for the biscuit. So I take these cards and I place them face down, but you don't need to play. You place your cards face up across from them, across from each card that you want to pair it with. Any card that you don't pair will be hitting you directly. So the challenging player then flips them face up. So I flip my cards face up, and cards that you have matched with my cards, so you've put across from them face up, are matched. Then we do the challenge damage. So we figure out the results, and then at the end of this, all challenging characters become engaged. So all the characters that I sent to challenge you, they all become engaged. They all get engaged. So they, at the end of the turn, at the end of the challenge phase for me, if they survive, they get pretty much tapped. Challenge damage. So if you have a paired challenge, then we take the defending card, which is your card, and my challenging card, and we compare them. Let's say we're doing a power challenge. Card with the highest challenge stat wins. We compare. Your power is a 9, my power is a 5. You win. If it's a tie, neither card wins. So the following resolves. A losing card is destroyed. You lose. Your card is destroyed. I lose this challenge because you had a higher power stat. My card is destroyed. I'm the owner of that card, so I lose a point in the challenge stat. This is a power challenge. I have the lower power stat, therefore my card, therefore I lose 1 PP, 1 power point. If if I didn't have any power points, then you could go, well, you've got a lot of knowledge points here. It seems like you're trying to win that way, so you're going to lose 1 knowledge point, and I lose that stat. If it's if neither of them win, then you don't lose anything. Neither of the cards are destroyed. If you don't pair a card, so for example, I place down 3 challenging cards, you place down 1 defending card. That means that there's 2 that aren't being defended. Well, then this character then will deal just 1 point of the challenge stat to you. So this is a power challenge. You don't defend 2 cards. You lose 2 power points. Same rule as above, just your card isn't destroyed, and it deals the damage to you. Effect speed. So, right, cards have effects. Event cards have effects. How do they resolve? All effects resolve from the last play, from the current effect. No effects are faster than other effects currently in the game. So if I say, I'm going to challenge you, and then you say, well, I challenge you with a knowledge stat, and you go, well, I'm going to use a card that forces everybody to not challenge this turn, then I can't challenge, because that resolves before my statement of effect, that I'm challenging you. Okay, got it? So these resolve in that order. So right, if an effect is activated, all players get a chance to respond to it before the person who played the effect or who's affected it gets to respond. Okay, so if you do an effect and I do an effect again, if you play an effect, then everybody else at the table has a chance to counter that effect before that person plays another card that's maybe comboing off of it. Okay, so every link in a combo chain can be blocked, and everybody gets a chance to block it before you play your next one. Recruited characters in constructed buildings. Okay, so for recruiting and constructing, when they are recruited, if an effect is going to be activated by that, it happens right away. Okay, so if a card says, this card is recruited, search your deck for a surfer, put it into play, that happens. All active effects are always in effect until a card is removed. So if we have a card that says, all surfers get +1 knowledge point, then all surfers get +1 knowledge point until this card's removed. And then they suddenly, instead of having 2 knowledge points, they go back to having 2 knowledge stat, they go back to 1 knowledge stat. This should be stats. This should not be points. Cards don't generate points. Again, this is a relic of past times and a typo on my part because the acronyms are just so similar. Okay, an effect for discarding, destroying can only be activated the turn after it's recruited. So an effect that's like, destroy this card to special recruit 2 cards. You can't use that the turn you play it. You can't play a card and then go, and now I destroy it. And as well, a character may not challenge on the turn it's recruited unless it has the special ability Swift. Swift is one of the keywords in the game. Pretty much Swift lets you challenge on the turn you've been played. So that's very important. Pretty much consider it like summoning sickness from Magic again. I'm doing a lot of Magic parallels, but it is the TCG, so makes a lot of sense. And finally, let's look at some keywords. Now that you know the rules, cards are going to have some keywords. These keywords are engage and unengage. That means pretty much to tap and to untap the card. Turn the card on its side, you can't use it again until it is unengaged. Upgrade plus X. You put X +1 counters on the card of any combination of stats. So for example, if we have an upgrade 2 to the card, we could put a +1 to its knowledge and +1 to its power, or a +2 to its knowledge, +2 to its culture, +1 culture, +1 knowledge, any combo that we want. Piercing, a card that has, we skipped Swift, but we just did Swift, right? It may challenge on the turn it's recruited. It is fast. Piercing, if it wins the challenge, instead of inflicting 1 point of damage, it inflicts the difference in the points of damage to a minimum of 1. Okay? So if you do not block a card that has piercing, you just take all of pretty much its stat in damage. So if this card has like a 8 power during a power challenge, and you don't block it and it has piercing, it does 8 to you. Or if you block it with a card that has 1 power stat, then it does the difference, which is 8 minus 1, 7. It does 7 to you. Double challenge. Double challenge is rare, but cards with double challenge, pretty much after the challenge phase of using this card, you may challenge again with it, and any more double challenge cards that challenge this turn. You may challenge a different target. This doesn't count as another challenge phase. It's kind of another challenge phase, but you don't get the option of challenge, not challenge. You're just told, well, you can challenge with this card a second time if you want. But you can't say, I'm not going to challenge and then get your extra points and stuff. Final one is targeting. Instead of placing this card face down for challenging, you may place it face up and then you select the opponent's card to be the one challenging it. For example, I believe archers have targeting. If I have an archer and I'm like, I'm going to do a power challenge, my archer is going to be challenging your merchant because it has targeting, and that is great for selecting opponents' weak cards that you want to get rid of with your stronger targeting cards. And with that, that is the rules for Historia TCG version 0.4.0. The playtest has begun. So if you're interested in taking part and helping me with developing this game, you can go ahead and check out the description. There'll be a link to a Google Doc which will have this lovely slideshow, as well as access to the Excel sheet with all the cards, their effects and such, and an access to the printable versions of all of the cards. If you're interested in playtesting this game, you can always reach out to me on our Discord, which will also be down below for playtesting this game. When you do, you can always reach out and ask for a card list specifically for printing purposes, because I can print a list of the cards if I have the time. If I can't, just go and print off the sheets, and you'll have some stock ones. Maybe you can make a few decks from doing that. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any input, put that down below. And if there's anything that you'd want to learn about for the Historia TCG, leave a comment. Tell me what you want to find out about next. And if I don't hear anything, I'm going to just start talking about the different cards and the people that they're based off of. That's right, so we'll be doing like historical figures. It could be Julius Caesar, and then I'll talk about Julius Caesar and then tell you about his card and kind of the idea behind the effects for it. Without further ado, thank you again for watching and have a lovely evening.